Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mage the Ascension wrap-up episode. This is going to be a relatively short stream because we've got a new game that we're going to start. But I wanted to take a little bit to sit down and talk about our experiences with Mage, both as a rule set and in Roll20. I know that we all have some feelings about the game.
What,
Andrew,
us?
I'm looking at
No.
you. Well, so this is the thing, right? Like,
Feelings.
I mean, I think part of why, at least for me, part of why I play games is to wrap my head around like why they were designed the way they were designed and like how games
That's
work
a
is
good
fascinating
question.
to me. Yeah. So we did 20. Well, we did 10 full episodes, sort of 11. And, we got a chance to really sit down with Mage. And I think personally, that's probably like, I think we experienced kind of, aside from some of the more complex, like magic dueling rules, I feel like we got a pretty good handle on the way the core dice mechanic and the setting and all that stuff works. So I feel like we're at least qualified at this point to have a brief conversation about the game.
Certainly.
So let's talk about. I want to talk about the ephemera first, because this is what White Wolf and Onyx Path and like that whole pantheon of games is really about, right? Like their games sprang from a time where games were very kind of like GURPS and hero system and Dungeons and Dragons and very kind of like we're trying to create a world that feels simulation, like a simulation of a space. And so the White Wolf games came out kind of as a response to that, to be like, no, we want to tell stories. That's why you're a storyteller, not a game master. We're a troupe, not a gaming group or whatever. Flowery language aside, that was kind of their brand statement, right? It was just being like, story first, chronicles, not campaigns. So I guess it's interesting for me because I was gently guided into the like massive pile of stuff because I played Mage earlier in my gaming life. Now none of you had played a White Wolf game prior to
Oh,
this
I
one.
played Vampire and
Okay.
I'd run Werewolf. So I
Okay.
was familiar with the kind of core White Wolfy stuff.
Yeah, with their jam, but not Mage specifically.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So just to give the audience sort of some idea here, how long is the Mage core book, the Mage 20 core book? Like 700 pages.
658?
There you go.
Yeah.
Something
But
like
it's
that.
about maybe 100 pages of rules and then
Yeah.
like 500 pages of fluff
But the rules are dispersed amongst those 658.
and not indexed.
So yes, that being the case, it was a pretty deep hole to jump into right away, right? It's 660 pages of stuff. There's a lot of background, and especially because this is the 20th anniversary. Like we're collecting all of the core plot stuff together. I mean, we kind of threw that all out though, right? Like that was the only. It felt to me like the only way to survive, right? Like we
Yeah, I
were.
mean, I wasn't realistically gonna sit down and read a novel and then perform the novel.
I mean, I think the thing is like it's the equivalent of you either have to kind of throw it out or commit to like reading a lot of material and remembering proper nouns and stuff, because otherwise it would be like, and you see a guy and he looks like this, and then the GM is kind of staring at you, waiting for you to respond. And you're like, I don't know, who is that
Like,
supposed to be?
oh, he's a technocratic New World Order, something elite adept,
Right.
Thoromancer. He's very a wizard of thoroughness.
No, he breeds horses. That's his magic.
I picked up that's the two directions my brain went with that. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think
yeah,
part of
go
it
ahead.
in the 20th anniversary edition though is that like because so many people did play these games, I think that like as you're talking about that Adam, that you were like more gently introduced to this kind of stuff, is that there's things that maybe over years people have like learned the different rules and whatever. And so while this is like a catch up, it could be like cool, here's how to get caught up on what everybody else like knows, or this is where we're making some official decisions about such and such slightly controversial or whatever thing. But so if you're coming into it, it's more just like, oh yeah, all this stuff, all my old friends, here's all these things, like refresher. But for anyone who's like new, and it's like, yeah, so here's all just like the basics that everybody else already knows that you should have an idea of so you can play. You're kind of like,
Yeah,
oh.
and I thought like it's interesting because it's one of those things where because we played characters, y'all had characters that were inexperienced, and we were able to sidestep a lot of the meta plot stuff. And like certainly, given another 90 episodes, I would have been introducing things like Dwasatep and like the Ascension War and all of the world stuff that's built into it. But I kind of wonder that like if you try to play that way from the beginning, it feels like there's not a lot of like space for the characters if you do that, right? And in a way, and I guess I hadn't realized this prior to GMing Mage, in a lot of ways, Mage feels as much like you're playing a game in someone else's IP as like a Star Wars role playing game does. Like it really felt to me as a GM like there's just a lot of clutter in that universe.
Yeah,
Whereas like, go ahead, Andrew.
they've just like taken every possible avenue with their themes, and there's no room left for you to like spin off on that.
I mean, I think there's stuff that you can do within it, but I think the thing is that Star Wars, as an example, is something that people might have had exposure to through other pop culture things. Whereas, like World of Darkness, you can be familiar with it because it's been around for a while, but like it's very its own thing. Like it's not that you would have like picked you. It's harder to just have like a general vague knowledge of World of Darkness stuff, I feel like, unless you had friends who played or talked about it a lot. Whereas I think a lot of people have a vague knowledge of Star Wars stuff, even if they have actually never watched a movie.
Sure.
Because it's just culturally saturated in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that and I guess the sort of point of all this is that we were disadvantaged a bit in that I don't know that there's a better way to introduce a group to Mage except to engage kind of at a low level and slowly build onto that stuff. But by comparison, it's hard also to be like, here's a 650-page rule book without also saying only pay attention to these specific parts of that book. I would have loved to have seen this product split into two things. Normally I'm not a fan of like setting book and rule book because I think that the rules and the settings should be intrinsically meshed, but also some kind of like quick start, like this is the basic 10 things that Mage is about. This is what you need to know before you make a character, not mechanically, but about the world. Yeah. In a more like clear way.
Yeah, because I think it would totally be like, I think starting off as like inexperienced mages learning about the world as players also learn about the world is cool. But I think also it would be possible to start a game kind of in media res, but you would need everyone to have really bought in on understandings of the setting and just generally like knowledge. Mm-hmm. Like everyone would have to be at a really similar place in terms of background knowledge in order for that to like really work. To like, yeah, we're all badass, whatever level mages that are experts and have been fighting the such and such. And here we start in the middle of, some battle with these bad people and whatever. Obviously, I'm really caught up on all the Mage source stuff. So.
Sure. Well, and so, I think what ended up ultimately being the trick, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this throughout the whole wrap up, but I think what ended up being the problem is that we gravitated towards the stuff that was interesting in the game, and the Magey stuff was maybe the least interesting, right? That was the stuff that got kind of like bled away. Like it really felt like, for me at least, like we were playing kind of like weird paranormal supernatural character drama that happened also to kind of be Mage, right?
I think further than that though, even if we wanted to do more Magey stuff, the system by design apparently wants to push you away from doing as much Magey stuff as it can because there are so many mechanics in it to punish you for using your magic.
Yeah, basically the game was written by the technocracy, right? Like that's totally how it feels. It's like the premise is written by a fucking etherite, and then the technocracy rolled up and was like, okay, but you can't actually do all that. Let me just rule lawyer you to death. Like, it's ridiculous.
I mean, you're not wrong in that It's interesting, and Hillary and I had a conversation a bit about this the other day. It's interesting how the premise of the game is basically ultimate freedom, right? It's basically that the power of your will is such that you can bend the world to be the way you want it to be. But the rules want very clearly to establish like parameters for that.
Yeah, they only work to hold you back. All the rules about magic are mostly about what you can't do.
That's actually that's a
Or
really
why
good point.
you can't do the thing you want to do.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a good point. I hadn't thought about that. It's about creating bounds ahead of you. It's walls in front of you rather than a space that you can kind of move around in.
Which
Yeah,
is
because
hard.
so go ahead.
I was gonna say it's hard in some ways because a lot of things are so open about it. You really have to do a lot of like mental gymnastics sometimes to figure out like, okay, so I have these kinds of powers and these kinds of skills. We're in this situation, and how can I make like those things, which is kind of fun and interesting, you know? So you have spend all this time figuring out like, okay, so how could I do this and how could I do that? Because there aren't really, as you said, rules like say as much saying like how to do things. It's more just like a general like, well, this is kind of the ways that this is applicable, and you have to kind of figure all that out in yourself. So it's especially frustrating when you like spend all this time and like put all this imaginative energy into coming up with this kind of stuff, and then like, yeah, so I do this thing and I do this other thing because I have this skill, blah blah blah, and you're like, yeah, I figured it out, and then the rules are like, aha, but
You didn't have Prime 7.
did you
Yeah.
but did you do this? You didn't, sorry. And so it's just like, because there's so many, yeah, because of the way that the rules are in some ways focused on limitations, it can be especially frustrating because everything else is so open that there's not really as much a guideline for how to do things. So you spend all this energy figuring out how to do things only to be shut down.
Yeah, and then you see if that fits within the parameters of the rules.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to have seen a way for us to sort of democratize the decisions about whether or not something was possible within, like we did a little bit of that, but fundamentally what it comes down to, I think, is when you want to work a magical effect, you just say, this is what I want to do. The GM says, okay, you need these spheres. You look at your character sheet, like, okay, I don't have those, never mind. Or you have to like debate your way into a place where, like, it feels like the advanced game, because we were a little like, we weren't super experienced with the rules, so we went to look at the rules, and if the rules more or less said you could or couldn't do something, we kind of stopped there. But I feel like if you're playing this game with a lot of sort of advanced players, I feel like it would get bogged down in like, well, I mean, I have Prime 2, but this is kind of a Prime 3 effect, and like in this rule it says this, and like I feel like it would get very lawyery around that space, because like you
absolutely.
said, it's sort of an unclear it's an unclear rules, or an unclear space, but clear rules that don't necessarily apply one to one.
And the thing is that even in the tables and so on that kind of outline like, okay, so in order to do this kind of thing, you need this and this, or this and this, or this and this. So, you know, you can't, there is some kind of like, well, I don't have life 3, but I do have life 2 and matter 1. And so I can blah, 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 you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think it does very much lend towards a bunch of like spending your time being clever about the rules and like showing that you have like, that you are more clever about them, or that you have like come up with a more ingenious way to like trick them into working. Like that's like the fun of the game, is like from a mechanical standpoint, is like tricking the game into working for you in a certain way.
It feels like at a really kind of fundamental level. As Adam said, right, the core premise is absolute freedom. You're supposed to be able to do whatever you want. And as the rest of us have said, all of these rules are written to let you not do that. And for me, like most of the time I open my character sheet, it was like trying to qualify being able to do something I wanted to do, but being disappointed. like 90% of the times I wouldn't be able to do what I wanted to do.
I
Or if
wonder. So I wonder where that where did that come into play? Like, at what point did we get disconnected from the design intention of the game? Right? Like,
What design intention?
well, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
What do
I
you
don't
think?
we did.
Yeah, what do you think that early level mage play is supposed to feel like, if not
Apparently,
this?
total shit. Like,
It's hard because
there were comments left where it's like, why didn't Andrew take like Arete 3 and a 3 and a sphere? Because that's like the only time you can actually do anything. And I'm like, motherfucker, what's the point of spheres 1 and 2 then? And like,
right.
why start with 3? Like, the game just
well, and
has
so
no
that's
structure. There's
yeah, I guess
no structure in the game.
I guess that's what I mean. Yeah. Do you think that if you had a group of people who are experienced with the system, is it an innate quality of the rules that if you don't start with Arete 3 and a sphere at 3, you are mismaking your character? Or do you think that the design is that you're supposed to be taking like 1s and 2s and stuff, but not really using your magic for anything?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? I think the game has, in terms of like how magic works, has a fundamental problem wherein, because of how they designed it with the like, points and spheres system, once you hit 3, you can kind of just like do almost anything, and then like by 4 and 5, it's just like cool. So every problem can now be solved by your magic because it can do such fundamentally like reality bending things that you can find a way to use it to solve any problem. And then at 1 and 2, it does basically nothing impactful.
Yeah.
I feel like
kind of like
if I was going to try and
dance or something, but
yeah, if I was going to try and nail down what the design intentions for the early level player was, I think we would have to come back to the idea of this World of Darkness stuff being foremost a storytelling system. I think if the design intention was that we don't have very much agency in the world and our only capabilities are to interrogate already existing fiction, that makes sense. We were trying to do a character-focused game where we would have agency, and obviously you don't have it until you have like 3 spheres. All the 1s and 2s we all put in just interrogated further stuff that like Adam was setting up about the world. I'm not sure I can attribute that design decision though. I feel like there is, like I was saying, this fundamental mismatch between wanting to give everybody freedom and also writing such a comprehensive list of things solely for the purpose of limiting that down. I think it's badly designed, unfortunately. I think maybe if they'd come into it with that specifically as the goal, it might have been more fun. If there was a way to communicate to us that low-level play is about finding out about the world, about finding out about your powers.
Yeah, there's nothing in it that's built on a sense of interrogation of that fiction. I think is the tricky thing. Like, it's an unclear progression. I guess what I think is that maybe the game ideally doesn't want to talk about progression. It just wants to be like, you're a mage, just build the character you want to build and tell the story you want to tell. But there is an innate sense of balance. It's very like gamey as far as these games go, which I think is why a lot of people sort of deviate towards the like LARP side of White Wolf's games, because the Mage LARP has like 6 or 7 rules, right? It discards so much of the cruft of the D10 system and all of that, and boils down to like sort of character drama. So I wonder if that's part of why folks gravitate towards the LARP side more.
All the D10 mechanic stuff just feels like a total leftover. Like the game feels like a hack of Vampire.
Yeah.
It's like everything before the Arete like area is just like, you mostly ignore that, and also doesn't really make sense in the context of the kind of character you're making, and also has these weird arbitrary divisions where like Y is like driving in one column and this other, like in a game that's so much about like just kind of do whatever and like have this really expansive, powerful character, they're still giving you these weird, arbitrary, and like very mundane categorizations of skills and stuff. And it's like just let me put points wherever. Like, why does it matter?
Well, so
How is
a
that
game.
important?
Yeah, the interesting thing about Mage is that we've sort of established the rules sort of block off the characters. They create a fence around what you're capable of doing, ergo what you're able to narrate in the world. But I feel like there's games that do like Amber and Nobilis and Undying that do the like you can do basically whatever you want. Whatever you want to narrate, your character is powerful enough to do that as long as you narrate it like within paradigm, right? And that's the most interesting part of the game to me. Paradigm and paradigm overlap and clash, like that stuff, and then from it the technocracy versus the traditions and all the different traditions and like their kind of cultural stuff. That's all the interesting stuff for the game for me. But in these games, basically it's like you can do whatever you want. You have a certain amount of points to gamble, because if some other mage tries to stop you, for example, then you have to do like a bartering or a betting thing where you're like, well, I'm willing to commit 4 points to this action. And then you get to narrate yourself winning or losing that. And it's less about well, we have to check and roll and compare target numbers and do all that.
I want to jump in for a second, just because there's a few things that are popping up in chat, and I just want to make it really clear that all of us like really, 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 really wanted to love Mage so much.
Yes.
We all wanted to love Mage. We're all still like, and people were saying, you know, there's some talk in chat about like, oh, well, maybe if they had been planning to do a short campaign, blah, blah, blah. I don't think we were necessarily planning to do a short campaign.
Mm-hmm.
We were actually like, okay, we're going to play Mage next. We're going to play it for, like, we were stoked because it's a pretty stable group. We were stoked about playing it for, like, a nice long time. There's things about the game that we were really enjoying. And so the fact that we're stopping at 10 sessions is not about that was part of the plan all along, because it wasn't.
Yeah.
And it's not about that, like, we came into this, like, just looking to prove some point about Mage. We came into this wanting to fucking love Mage.
Yeah.
We came into this wanting to play like a nice long campaign and whatever. But the things were, so that's why, just to give some like more context for the stuff we're talking about, because the reason that we're feeling like frustrated about it is because like we didn't come into this being like, oh, this is going to be a frustrating game. We came into this being like, I'm super stoked about this.
The game promises so much, right?
Yeah, and so I just want to be really clear, like, that the reason we didn't like mess with the rules in order to set things up as a shorter campaign or whatever is because that wasn't our plan. And so the reason that we're ending is because like we've played enough to hit a point where it feels really clear that like we understand the rules enough to know that it isn't just us, it's actually like game stuff that's the frustrating part. It isn't us not knowing the game well enough, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to give that as a bit of a contextual aside or whatever, or comment on some of the things that are coming up in chat.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a thing that people don't do very often, right? I don't think people decide to step away from games. Instead, they double down and they say, well, whatever, we'll play for 10 more weeks.
Just gotta try harder.
Just gotta like,
yeah.
I'm firmly of the mind that if you don't like a game, you stop playing it, right? Because I feel like, and this is definitely a thing that happened, right? We just focused more and more on the stuff that was interesting to us. And there were folks watching the show that I think were expecting more engagement with the rules, but we would spend an entire episode just kind of like ignoring them or not doing magic stuff or figuring out like why the characters are doing these things, or
the chat for why didn't we just Randy that one security guy? Why did we spend 2.5 hours when it would be one roll to just kill this nerd?
Yeah.
And really, it shouldn't even be a roll.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I punched him in the face and nothing happened.
Exactly.
But it's the kind of thing where I think the stuff that was like cool about this to us, like, and again, this came up, Adam and I have discussed this off stream previously, but like speaking for myself at least, and I think from discussions that we've had on the other players as well, is that some of the stuff that was really interesting to us was like, okay, cool. So we're these people who are human beings, but also have these incredible magical powers. Like, what does that mean? What do you do with that? Or like all of the kind of stuff on the character sheet like gives you this really rich sense of your character and feels really like full of promise of the kinds of things you could do with that. Like Andrew, you were saying is that you felt kind of whatever about, like, I still thought that all of the stuff about like, okay, well, am I really good at etiquette or like, am I really good at empathy or subterfuge? Am I better at like, or like the whole demeanor and nature thing and all those kinds of things I found like really interesting and really like rich in terms of like material to like build a character and play from moment to moment in the game. But as we've talked about, like as concepts, so much of the character stuff is like really rich, but then mechanically ends up either like an obstacle or kind of toothless.
There is a really cool premise, and there is also a game. They're not really related.
Look,
none of the mechanics of this game.
Here's what happened. Okay, let me just lay it out for you. Here's how so,
I'm ready.
In the 1990s or whenever it was that White Wolf became a thing, they were like, yeah, you know, we recognize that we should actually be writing dark indie comics, but instead we're going to be role-playing game publisher. And so we're going to write all this fluff material and then like realize late in the day that we need a game to go along with it. So we're going to kind of like, here you go, you roll some d10s, great. And like maybe it was avant-garde for its time, who knows? But the feeling I have now, like looking at it as from a like modern perspective, is like there's this game that is an afterthought to a bunch of really awesome, fun, fluff material. And like I love reading that and I love engaging with that stuff. But the game is kind of just like this vestigial thing attached to this larger body of fiction.
Yeah, and that's the case with a lot of kind of reaction to D&D games that came out in that time. Like Shadowrun is exactly the same game, right? Shadowrun is a deep, rich, quirky, interesting setting with rules that tend not to engage with that setting in a way that maybe we as more modern game consumers are used to or expect. And I think that we've sort of been...
The mechanics aren't like right in there with the themes.
Yeah, they don't propagate the themes at all. It's just dice, and then they have things to do with magic. They don't have like will is just automatic success on a dice. It's not integrated properly. It's not a proposition about how much something means to you. It's more just like okay, this is going to be something that changes the probability of the thing I'm going to do. It doesn't feel like cool. It's just, here's a bonus dot. It could just be called a bonus dot and it would do exactly the same.
And I think just as when we talked about our experience of playing Molde D&D, I think it's also important to like recognize this game, even though obviously we're playing the 20th anniversary edition, it's still important to recognize this game as like its place in sort of the larger development of tabletop role playing, and kind of how we talked about Molde as like this outgrowth from, you know, in the very early days of D&D, how things had grown out of wargaming and that kind of thing. And so thinking about this as a reaction to D&D and like really pushing this fantasy storytelling element. And I think that like my impression is that the game kind of wants to be a super rules light game that is like, because, you know, thinking about other things at the time like D&D GURPS as examples, and thinking about this like as a very like story heavy rules light. The problem being that there are still rules, and because we are playing this game, I think that all of us have a like tendency or desire to at least attempt a game rules as written. And so we're playing the raw game, and there are rules, and the rules like kind of are like having a fight with everything else that we're trying to do, which is, you know, why, as you were saying before,
the rules are mostly about fighting too, for that matter.
Yeah.
More rules about how to pilot a tank than how to like.
Yeah, and so that's
like, my paradigm is a footnote on my character sheet.
And so, but talking about this as like, as a moment in like design history and the history of like tabletop role playing as a hobby, if you think about it also as like, imagine the people who got into this and were like really into the world, were really into their characters like we were and all that kind of stuff, and were continuously feeling like frustrated by the rules. And I mean, I think that at this point, we, all of us in this game at least, know enough about game mechanics and that we have enough history and time since these games came out to kind of see that, okay, well, this isn't us like not understanding the rules well enough or just not trying hard enough. It's the rules. Whereas I think playing at the time, you're not necessarily a game designer. You don't necessarily have any other thing to compare it to because it was a stage, it was a stepping stone. And so I think a lot of people probably were either like, well, the rules like probably they work, but I just don't get them enough, so I just need to try harder, or my table is just going to modify them this way or that way, or let's stop worrying about the dice and the table and just play the story, which is where you go like hard in the LARP direction. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's really interesting to like think about in that kind of context, like in terms of what it has meant for gaming since then. And like the kind of like hard, I think that probably World of Darkness really launched LARPing harder than it otherwise would have if it had better tabletop mechanics.
Yeah, I wonder about that for sure.
It's a like we were saying, it's a product of the fact that we come into this expecting, from a design standpoint, the rules to be made as an extension of the setting, and
at least to be compatible.
Yeah, during this time they were separate things. Whether the intention was, like Andrew said, they probably should have just written comics instead, or
yeah, I mean, I feel like it's interesting because I still feel very like fond of Mage, but as a fictional thing, not as a game necessarily. And I think that the sort of irony is that for a game that basically wants you to be an interesting superhero, you're not Spider-Man, you're detects spiders man, right? Like it's I get that there's an arc, right? I get that there's you want to play the novice, like learning your way through the world of magic and becoming powerful. That's a really powerful like narrative. It's interesting, but it's also really frustrating when the whole game premise is big, right? It's big fantasy. It's interesting and it's kind of out there
around you having Arete 5.
Like I can't
part of it some Arete 2 chump.
I can't imagine what as a GM what I would make the game about, like what the opposition
as a storyteller, Adam.
Sorry. As the storyteller, because you're not storytellers, just me. I'm not sure what I would make an early Mage game would be like what the opposition would be. Right? And the game would become, you wouldn't use most of the rules, you wouldn't use, and I guess that's sort of the whole problem, right? In that like the rules are there to iron out conflict between either the player's idea of the narrative and the ST's idea of the narrative, or two opposing parties within that narrative, right? Where it's just there to say who wins this particular thing. And I feel like it would be difficult to move away from that without also discarding those rules or ignoring them.
So I think another part of this is also as much as this is a reaction to D&D, I feel like from our discussions of our friend Gary, I feel like this would have been in some ways a game he could have got behind because you're the storyteller. You're supposed to make up a story and we play it out. It's not like the way that things are like expected to function mechanic wise and so on. Like I think the way the game expects to be played is very like the storyteller is going to like come up with a story and a plot line, and the players will play it out. We are actors on the stage who are going to enact this drama or whatever that you as the storyteller have come up with and are directing, and will exist within the larger narrative of the thing. And so that's very obviously that style of gameplay is still very much alive today, but that's very at odds with the way that we tend to play now, which is much more emergent narrative.
Not play to see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. This is like play
more.
out instead of playing out a predetermined narrative.
And that's actually that's pretty revelatory, because I think that diffuses the whole "you can't do anything" problem, because you're not really supposed to.
No, you're not supposed to.
Right.
You're just
and
supposed
to
to
your
play out the story.
to your point earlier, Dave, if the only powers you have are narrative interrogation powers, all you have is magic detectors, it just lets the GM gush more stuff at you about the world. That's really interesting, actually. And I hadn't thought about it that way. But the idea that the players are only equipped with the ability to ask more informed questions about the storyteller's story, built on top of that very traditional authority model, it makes sense, right? And that eventually you get to a point where your characters can say to the GM, no, I don't like that there's a car here. I want there to be a fireball here instead. And you have the power to make those changes in the game, but you have to earn it. You have to play however many. So in a way, I wonder if we weren't the GM agenda here. I should have asked you less shit and cared less about what you wanted in the game and just told you what was going to happen.
Like, that's why I think this, in some ways, this storyteller moniker is very apt in that way, because that's really what you're expected to be doing. And again, like, I think if we think about this as situated in its original context of like the other games that existed at the time, this style of gameplay that was kind of assumed to exist at a table, it makes a lot of sense in that way. And that, I don't know, I know that people in this game, but I'm not sure how many people in the audience will have played a game like Serpent's Tooth, but it's almost like there's an unspoken Serpent's Tooth thing going on, where like the storyteller is in charge, and then eventually the characters get powerful enough that they can be like, no, I take this thing away from you, storyteller, and I say how it happens. But that, instead of all of us building a story together, like for the first long while, like the storyteller or GM or whatever is like very in charge, and it is their game and their story, and we are here to figure, like, to basically be aids to them to tell their story, instead of modern play, which much more presents the GM or whoever's running the table, whatever, as like almost more an aid to the players to come up with or discover the story. It's very the opposite.
Yeah. Less king of town and more players butler. I think it's interesting because White Wolf developed later on in their history some more experimental stuff in other games around that kind of narrative space. We had this game in Exalted. There's a supplement in which you play reality crafting, like chaos fairies, basically, and your powers weren't about what your character could do. It was about the things that you could conjure up into the story. So I might have a power where I can roll it to generate things about war, right? Where I could be like, and then an army of soldiers marches up into the scene, and like I could roll my conjure army of soldiers ability. And what ended up happening is that the conflicts in those were essentially small scale, what some people call story games now, where there is no GM. They were little GM-less storytelling sessions, and then you'd step back and go back to the normal thing, where it would be like if two of these fair folk got in an argument, they'd be like, fine, we'll have a story off, and I'm going to tell a story about love, and you're going to tell a story about war, and whoever wins, then we get what we want, right? And it became these little micro stories. And so I think that watching them, and this was relegated to like a subset of a different game, but that kind of thing in Mage almost would feel more appropriate, right? Like taking that step back and giving the players the ability to modify not just the fictional stuff in the narrative, but the narrative itself, right? To not say, I use my magic power to blow up the garbage can, but to say I'm rolling my ability to say what goes in the fiction about matter, and there's no garbage can, right? There just isn't one. Or whatever.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think for me, and from what everyone else is saying as well, we were a little disappointed by the fact that there were the mechanics weren't built to sort of incentivize or encourage a kind of play. And I think we're realizing that that is because the incentive and the encouragement to play is to have slightly more agency in a story that otherwise you're only supposed to be able to listen to passively and find out more about, and that is your role. So expecting from this time period mechanics which do the like the narrative conflict stuff is maybe asking a little bit much.
Oh yeah,
I think
for sure. Yeah. I wonder about that. Like, if the game, in my mind, if the game is designed well, the early parts of the game are there to give you space to explore the mechanics for the next part of the game, and so on and so on. But I feel like we would have, if we had not tried to play Mage the way that it is advertised on the box, we might have had more success just being like, pick 4 spheres, you have 1 dot in them, your characters are supernaturally perceptive at a bunch of stuff, and now we're just going to do like weirdo character drama for whatever 10 episodes. Right? Like, because the character stuff was interesting. I think, honestly, one of the more useful things from a characterization perspective was the nature and demeanor part. Like, I thought I could see that. And it's funny because it was triggering, not because of the way that it works in the rewards structure, because
which doesn't work.
There's
Saying
no
that
reason.
It works is a misstatement.
Yeah, there's no reason to try to play your nature or demeanor to get willpower when you could just have a nap. It's much easier just to sleep. But
anyways, but yeah.
Yeah, but it was interesting because I could see you as role players making decisions about your characters based on your nature and demeanor, and like seeing those come into conflict with each other and that kind of stuff. I thought that was interesting, but again, it's just like saying, you were chaotic evil. Good work. You did the alignment thing.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to say that it's actually kind of cleverly designed if you think about it from that perspective, that there is an arc for the gameplay that is tied to the power level of the characters. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. Like you say, it's advertised one way, and then you play it a totally different way. And even having read most of that 700-page rulebook, I still didn't get the sense. I still thought I was supposed to be like the hero, the one changing reality. That's the premise of the game. If you told me during character creation, you should probably look at being someone who is still learning about the world. That means you're not going to be able to do much to change it, but finding out is part of the fun. And like putting storyteller every time it said it as the GM's role, in like size 72 bold font, probably would have like made me more inclined to believe it was deliberately designed that way.
Well, so Unknown Armies does this actually really well, where Unknown Armies says there's 3 kinds of campaigns, right? There's like underground, street level, and cosmic level, or something like that, where it's like, these are the character creation processes. If you just want to play like shitty wizards who are crap at everything, you can maybe do one cool magic trick, but basically the game is about, you've been thrust into a terrifying supernatural world you did not yesterday know exists. So now, like, it's still about like switchblades and dirty alleys and like weird graffiti and being confused and upset about the world. And maybe you've got these 1 or 2 tricks that'll let you like get out of a scrape, but that's the main like part of that. And then street level is a different set of character creation where it's like, you've been at this a little while, you don't know all the mysteries yet, you're not top of the pile, but like you're not crap either. Like you've figured it out, you've come up in the world. And then the cosmic is like, okay, everything, you're ready, just go to town. And they have different parameters. And I would really like it if Mage was more explicit about that. Like if Mage said to us, you can't have an Arte over this amount, or like at least gave some style parameters to say, if everyone doesn't buy Arte 3, it's going to feel very different.
It kind of does, doesn't it? It has those limitations, but they are badly balanced limitations.
And they're not explicitly described either.
Yeah, that's I think even more the thing, Andrew. Yeah. Because it, as people are saying, and it's interesting, like watching our discussion and watching chat as well to see what people are like mama about, because people are always mama about something. That I think, because as you're saying, Dave, like we did read the rules, like for a lot of them. I didn't read I definitely skipped a number of chapters of that almost 700 pages, but I did all of the rules related sections. I read and reread numerous times, trying to like get them in my brain and get my head around them. But like, yeah, there was all kinds of stuff around like, okay, well, when you create your character, like there were limitations around like you're supposed to start small. You only have this much to spend on these things and this much to spend on these things, and these are the consequences. But yeah, that it's like if the game is not meant for us to start small, then why does it start us small? And so for all the people in chat who are saying like, well, yeah, you guys just, you should have just changed the rules to whatever. It's like, cool. So that's not like, I know a bunch of us in this game have strong feelings about like playing the raw rules as written game, in that like, if in order to have a game be successful, you need to change the game, then the game itself is not successful. It is a useful inspiration point. There are a lot of games that are not of themselves good games, but are very useful inspiration points for people like coming up with their own more functional game.
Yeah. And I think that the power level stuff, because it's not like, aside from Arete, like every White Wolf game kind of has a stat that says what level are you, right? Like in Mage it's Arete. I think that aside from that, there's no clear indication of the kinds of stories you should be telling for characters of different arcs necessarily. I mean, it comes from a time in which GM advice was all you got, right? Where it's like there is a storyteller section in the book, but it's more about themes, about establishing
storytelling, Adam.
Yeah, how storytelling works, like how you tell stories, but not explicitly like about how the mechanics. Stories. Yeah, not how the mechanics interact with those stories necessarily.
Because they don't.
Right, in a lot of ways they don't.
It's meant to be a rules-like thing, where that's why I think a lot of people just at a certain point, we're just like, actually, fuck the rules. Like, throw the mechanics out. Let's just tell a story, and we're gonna have our characters, and we're gonna tell a story about it. And at no point are we going to have decisions resolved by rolling dice.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's a game that doesn't exist that leverages all of Mage's like cool stuff in a way that mechanically is like relevant, but this game is not that, right? This game it feels like there's a big divide between the stuff I really like and the rules of the game. And I don't think, and I guess this is the thing, I don't think you can get better at running or playing Mage. I think you can learn the rules, but you can't wring too much expertise out of anything other than the mechanical level stuff, right? Knowing what dots do what and knowing how much modifier you get for any given thing, you can master that. You can master the sort of dry set of stuff, but fundamentally the story that you're trying to tell is always going to be separate from those rules. It doesn't feel like a game that you skill up in the way that like Burning Wheel does. I wonder about that too, like because there's nowhere in the rules that say like Burning Wheel is very explicit about like this is a hard game to learn, but you'll get better at it, and you can see it happening as players learn the game. But in Mage, there isn't much about that. There's just like get familiar with the meta plot and get familiar with the modifiers and how the pools get put together. But all that doesn't make you faster at the game, not necessarily better, I don't think, at telling stories with it.
Yeah, I feel like you get to know the rules enough that you know when you can drift them and what you can work around and what you can change without breaking the rest of everything. But that's not the same as getting good at a game. It's getting good versus a game.
Yeah, I wonder.
And that's different.
I wonder how much any given Mage campaign that's been running for a while with the same group and has a group of people who are familiar with the rules. I wonder how far it's drifted from the core rules, right? Because the White Wolf pioneered that whole, you don't need the rules, the golden rules. You can throw out a rule if you don't like it. You can make your own rules. You can bend and modify. And I'm a firm believer of modifying games to suit the kind of play that you're looking for. But I wonder how much the understatement there is you have to. Like, do not look at the rules as a complete set. They're not ready. You have to bake them before you can eat them, right?
That's certainly true whether or not they're going to say it explicitly in their book.
Well, and I wish they had, right? I wish that was something that the rules were explicit about, that they said, this is the core, like, give us one mechanic. Just be like, this is the mechanic you need to resolve conflict. Here are some ways that it can be applied. And then let us, if we're expected to already, let us build up around that mechanically, right?
And I think that, again, if we think about this contextually, like, it is in some ways innovative in terms of its departures from like D&D and GURPS and stuff. But who is it who said this in chat? Figure Force did something in chat.
Yeah, I
Where they said that basically how White Wolf innovated is that they wrote a lot of essays about how a game could be different from D&D in theme and philosophy, but they didn't actually redesign the rules to match that theme and philosophy. So I think that it's like important to think about Mage and the other White Wolf games as like a really important cultural moment and like stage, but that also like, I think people, because they really like the themes of the World of Darkness games, and they really like some of what they ended up doing and the ways that those games differed from the other things that were out there at the time. I think they confuse that with the games being well designed mechanically.
Yeah, and I wonder because the understanding of role-playing games, like, honestly, it's taken us like 30 years to understand why basic D&D is as good as it is, and like what it's good for, and get a sort of firmer understanding of that. Like, I wonder if we just need to spend more time understanding these sort of 90s like third wave RPG space. I wonder if it's going to just take us time before we can really, like, we're starting to really see like the way that it was designed from a bit of a distance. I'm not saying we're gonna like suddenly be like, oh my god, it's good, but I think we're gonna get what it looks like in the broader scheme of the technology of role playing games, right?
Yeah,
sure.
I think it was a hopeful middle child between D&D and games that actually have mechanics around narrative.
Yeah,
but I think it's also a necessary, like, maybe it doesn't stand on its own in the ways that we wish that it would, but I think it's also still a necessary middle step in between those kinds of things.
Yeah,
not the only one, but the most like culturally saturated one, which gives
a really
beyond other things that may or may not have been better designed.
We're seeing, it's interesting because we're seeing this like we're seeing this sort of space develop where, so if there's a term for a particular kind of game. I think Ron Edwards coined it, called a fantasy heartbreaker. And these were games that people were developing as a response to Dungeons and Dragons that really weren't that different from D&D, but they were like, well, it's like Dungeons and Dragons, so there's no classes. You just pick abilities and you can be whatever you want. You want to be a wizard that wears armor? You could do that. But everything else is fundamentally exactly like D&D. And I think that in a lot of ways, White Wolf's games
they're that.
Are that. Yeah. They're a form of fantasy heartbreaker, but they're an urban fantasy heartbreaker where they're like, in the other way, it's like, we don't want to tell stories that are simple and about, we're done with Tolkien. It's the sort of like, we're too cool for Tolkien. We're interested in different cultural stuff, and we want to play a game that's about like vampires, right? Vampires are super cool, and we want to play a game about them, but there's no design behind that.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see games, like, urban fantasy is so popular right now. It's hugely popular, right? And we're seeing games in that mold, like Urban Shadows and the Dresden Files, everything to do with Dresden, where this is why I don't think we can have a White Wolf version of the OSR, because the OSR is about the rules of those games. So the old school Renaissance is like people bringing back like basic D&D and making new stuff out of it or modifying it for play. And, a lot of people, I've seen this on Twitter a lot, people saying like, well, maybe there's going to be an OSR for 90s games, but so many of these 90s games, the rules are irrelevant. So it's impossible.
They're not about the rules.
It's impossible to be anything but nostalgic about them.
That was what I was going to say. I was skeptical about. Its cultural significance as a game was that it started doing things that weren't weren't traditionally covered in role-playing games, but it didn't change how the game was played. It is this, and also a role-playing game.
Yeah.
So changing the rules is just going to be changing previous iterations of D&D with the flavor that's already established. There's no
I mean, they
room.
tried. It just, we're unfortunately discovering that it didn't really work the way.
Yeah, there are places where White Wolf's rule set actually like does pretty well. I think there's a kind of mage game you can play, but it tends to be Aetherites on the moon, fighting void engineers and space monsters and like high level, or like it works really nicely as, I was gonna say, as the Sorcerer's Crusade, which is the historical version, but that's a different game. That's Ars Magica does mage well because you're all like wizards, and it's actually mechanically more about managing an estate than it is about being like a highfalutin spellcaster.
I think for a lot of people also, when this came out, they're just so excited about the premise that it didn't matter.
Sure, yeah.
The rules were garbage.
And there's no reason why you can't take all of that delightful, like, secondary material from these books and just, like, wrap another game with that does a better job at making you be a wizard.
Yeah,
Like,
and when I see people in chat and elsewhere talking about, like, learning to play mage better, or like, oh, well, you're just not experienced, like, what it really seems that they're saying about like being an experienced player or whatever is like going back to rule 0 at all times, and rule 0 being just abandon the rules.
Well, and I think fundamentally as a player, right, like it's all well and good as a storyteller because I get the golden rule. That's my weapon to wield against the game. That whenever I don't like it, I can change it. The trick being, yeah, you as players, you can't even really learn because I can change the rules whenever I want, right? We can bend it and change it, and it's not a thing that you have any access to. Which probably
that's supposed to be fun,
right? And I
like,
mentioned
animosity between player and GM is like supposed to be like fun. That's the fun of tabletop games, is that you're fighting each other for supremacy over the narrative, and also like within the narrative, also like being able to control the narrative.
Sure. Yeah, and I think like White Wolf, the games and Mage specifically, like the storytelling chapter does specifically lay out like, don't be a tyrannical dictator, don't use these powers for evil, right? Your goal is to make an engaging narrative that everyone is involved in, but it doesn't give the players the game doesn't give the players the tools to necessarily do that. So it's, again, all the work is on the GM to be both benevolent overlord and instigator of chaos, right? So it's a lot of work to GM, and it's a fascinating. I definitely think that these games, Mage, Vampire, they're a huge flag in the landscape of tabletop role playing. Like, we wouldn't have an apocalypse world if it weren't
I think
for
so much of what came after is impossible without the work put in by this series of games.
Yeah, and what I'm really hoping to see in the future, and obviously Mage 20 specifically is not a game for changing what Mage is about, right? Like, it's explicitly like we're gonna, it's celebratory, exactly. And as a Mage fan, as a longtime Mage fan, I think it's a beautiful product. The book is amazing. It does everything that I would have hoped in weaving all of those disparate webs together. But I also think that on the flip side, and this is almost always true of celebratory, nostalgia-driven items like this, it's nearly impregnable to new players, right? Like, unless you have that that heft of weight behind you of experience with these games, it can be very, very difficult to penetrate the great outer wall of nostalgia and get into the game and appreciate it for what I think M20 was written for. What I hope comes next is a leveraging of those themes and those worlds using more modern tabletop technology. Like, I think we have the tools now. I mean, just look at Undying, right? I think that Undying does some amazing stuff with the idea, and it's essentially a love letter to Vampire, but it's built on a framework that does I think it feels truer to the original intent than the rules from the 90s did.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, was the 20th anniversary edition, like it's obviously meant to be like celebratory and like a beautiful presentation of and like clarified version in some ways of the original. It's not meant to be a new thing. And so even though the way that rules for tabletop role playing have innovated and changed in a large way based off of both the successes and like failures, or like failures in some ways, but almost just more like holes.
It's oversight, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
redesigned the game. There's cool stuff, but it's still just what a role playing game was. Like
yeah, and so I would be really interested to see what would happen if, you know, like there's the 20th anniversary stuff. So much, I feel like so much of the material, from what I know from like a slight bit of like knowing a couple people who did some behind the scenes stuff, there's so much really interesting stuff around the world, like the world building and that narrative possibility stuff, that it would be really interesting to see what could happen if a game was built knowing what we know now about, like, through trial and error, through iterative game designs, because all tabletop game design is iterative.
Yeah.
And like what could happen using the world, scrapping the old rules and building new rules. Because people, you know, obviously not for 20th anniversary, because people are very like, people who are like hardcore want to hold on to those bits, but like all the stuff that we are really, really, really excited about and like love about this game, like in some ways I just want to keep playing the campaign we're playing for like another year or two, because I care a lot about the characters. I want to know what's happening. I like, you know, I want to read, as Andrew's saying, I want to read the graphic novel of our game.
Yeah.
Like big time. I really care about what's happening and stuff. And that's really cool. But we got to a point where we were like, we can't keep playing it.
So by the rules, by the text of the book, the answer to that problem that we're having right now would be just stop using the rules we don't like and make up new rules and break up the game into the pieces that we did enjoy and change the rules. And like we're encouraged to jump out of the plane without a parachute at this point, right? There's no framework for hacking the game. There's no guidance for it, but there's the explicit permission to do so, which, I mean, I don't need, but it's in there.
And that was part of, like Hillary was saying, the innovative qualities of the game. It was saying, which a lot of things didn't before, explicitly, it's not working, change it.
Well, and
but also I feel like in some ways it goes too far to be like, if it's not working, change it. We're not going to.
Yeah. But again, it goes to this individuality that I think was built into Vampire from the get-go, right? Like Vampire was very much about being like, we're taking a stand against the idea that gaming is this monolithic fantasy adventure thing, and we're going to do our own thing, and we want you to do your own thing too, to the point where it's essentially we're so much not willing to tell you what to do that we won't bound you as a GM, at least within this space. Right? We're going to say you can do whatever you want, and we're not going to tell you what to do or not do. Just change the rules. But that doesn't apply once you get into the deeper mechanical stuff at the player level, because there is still that very clear divide between who's responsible for the rules and who isn't. I think
I'm so fascinated by like Mage, as I'm just like the like opportunity of it and everything. Like I'm just really into this game. And then I'm really not. It's like I'm just so into the like this level of it, and then like the nitty gritties of it.
The same call goes out with this as for me with Shadowrun, and also Final Fantasy 11, to like extrapolate a little bit. So many like interesting aspects of it that I would like people to redo and like mechanize in a way that utilizes all of the knowledge that we've got from the evolution of the hobby.
I mean, right? to use John's description for a way that a role-playing game works, I feel like with the World of Darkness family, the poetry layer on top of the game is about 7 miles deep, right? It's incredibly dense. It's huge and thick, and then the burning molten core is the rules, but it's way down there. And you have all of this cool stuff to dig through, but when you get to the core, you get incinerated. And it's like, okay, well, it was more fun getting into that stuff and reading through the thing and idealizing your character, but making them into dots, it becomes frustrating. And,
What you're trying to say is that the cake is a lie, Adam.
I guess so. There's some mixed geography and cake metaphor there, but
The memes are contaminating
So-
each other.
I mean, if I feel like if I had to make, I guess as a closing statement about, and I'd love to get a bit from each of you as a sort of your feelings on the game, both this one specifically and Mage generally. My core thought on this was that we did a really good job making interesting characters who were more interesting because they were mages, right? The fact that they belonged to certain organizations or the power dynamics or politics between them were amplified and made interesting by the fact that they were mages. That wasn't irrelevant. It was a big part of those characters. We were able to engage those characters in an interesting way and to do some cool social stuff. The parts where I felt like I was being encouraged to storytell the game were the least interesting for me. Like trying to push things towards happening, trying to like if we could just have played like some weirdos live in a movie theater and they have a friend who's a mom and she's a dick and like they all have kind of like personality problems. Let's play. Like it's just like a social thing. That would have been very satisfying for me. But that was not what this game was on a mechanical level. This game wanted us to be doing something or pushing towards something different for all the reasons that we talked about today. And so I feel like for me, Mage is always going to hold a special place in my heart, but I don't know that I'll ever play a game using not just these rules, but the core like World of Darkness rules. Again, I feel like I would want to find something else to express the stories rather than go with the rules that we have here. That's my feeling on the matter.
And I think I want to say at this point something that we've talked about before, not today, but like as a group we've talked about before, and some people in the audience may have heard us say before, is that like you can totally have a fun time playing a game that doesn't have like well-written or super functional rules. You can have a really fun time. We're not saying that like Mage is not a fun game, because I think all of us on some level, we're like really having a lot of fun with our game. And I can see that for the players in this game, because we're very like mechanically literate in terms of tabletop role players, and we think a lot about the mechanics of a game, that like there were certain things that became frustrating to a point that they were impinging on our fun. But that doesn't mean, so we're not here saying that like if you're having a fun time playing Mage, it's a lie. We're not.
Yeah, totally.
We're saying that like we're interested in talking about like, okay, well, if like us, you know, we started realizing like, oh, I'm having fun, but I'm also feeling really frustrated. What is that? And so we're talking about like, oh, well, what is that? Like, where is that coming from? And so, but just to be clear that like, it's totally possible to have a really fun time playing a game. And honestly, like a thing that Mage, and just based on from what I know of it from this, like the World of Darkness games maybe more generally do, is like provide you with so much like narrative possibility and things to build on and dig into, that there is, I think that in that way it like heightens the possibility of fun, because like there's so much to play with, even while the mechanics kind of like sap some of it. So I think it's totally possible to have a really fun time playing Mage. We were, and then it was becoming less fun, so we're stopping, is basically it.
Yeah. And that's a good lesson for anyone playing role-playing games, right? Like there's a lot of games out there, and you know, you don't have to keep playing the same.
Yeah. And that also, I guess the flip side of that is that just because you've had a really fun time playing a game is not the same thing as the rules being well designed. So having a critique of the rules is not us saying the game sucks, never play it. And having a fun time does not translate to like, well, it must be really greatly designed then. Everything fits together flawlessly because I had a fun time. You can have a shitty time playing a well-designed game too. So much of your game experience is really just who's at the table and what are they bringing into it.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing about role-playing games in general, right? Is that there's so much going on that you can't attribute necessarily everything to one source or another. Do you, Dave? Do you have closing thoughts on Mage? Would you like to share your final word? I'm saving you for last, Andrew, because I know you've got things to say that you want to.
Just give me a whole PowerPoint.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go after Andrew, that's for sure. I think, again, there's unfortunately that discrepancy between what is advertised as the way the play is going to be and then the way the play is going to be in the game. Like we were saying, I would really, really be interested in seeing a game that is built with this setting, with the core premises of using your own will to shape the world, but is built from the ground up as a system, not a response to already existing systems in the way that they were at the time, and actually mechanizes and encourages you to play in that specific way that I find interesting, as opposed to the rules being there, kind of separate and divorced from the game, but only serving as boundaries. It's negative design with the intent of everything to balance and make it so that your players know your place, right? You're not the storyteller. Where a lot of more recent games are about empowering the player, finding out what they're going to do, and all the rules are written to tell you what your capabilities are, not what your limitations are. So yeah, I really, really wanted to love Mage, a lot. I got super into it. I was super interested in my character, and I'm very disappointed I'm not going to find out what happens with them. But even when they were doing the things that they wanted to be doing more than anything else, I still ended up being kind of bad at them because the mechanics weren't there to support me being good at what I wanted to be good at.
Cool. Andrew, thoughts? Closing remarks?
I think all of you have made some very good points, and I'm really excited for these series of graphic novels that will come out.
Yes.
And I don't know, that's really all I have to say. I used to tear apart game designs for a living, so yes, I can just go in and sharpen my teeth on this thing, but that's not really fair to it. And yeah, y'all have said everything that really needs to be said.
Yeah. Well, explicit permission for anybody who wants to make fan fiction of the characters to go and please do that.
Oh my god, our characters are so great.
Because
I
I think
about their lives and everything that they do. That's why I think we're really we were real tore up about this decision.
If White Wolf were to just become the next comic book publisher,
honestly, I don't care about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Sorry, everybody, but if we wanted to just if it was what about just the World of Darkness?
I'm gonna point out that there was a very brief, very terrible '90s show called Kindred the Embraced. And if you haven't watched that bad boy on YouTube, go check it out. Also, the Underworld movies are basically just World of Darkness with the serial numbers filed off.
Yeah, but I want it done in the art style of all of the awesome art from the rule books.
I think for me, one thing that's important to kind of take away from this is that, and I guess I hadn't really thought about it from the get-go, but as a greatest hits compilation, as a box set of Mage's highest numbers, I think Mage succeeds wholeheartedly.
It really does that.
I almost wish that it wasn't a game at all, that all the game stuff had just been removed from it.
They could have just compiled all the fluff, and people would still buy it, and it would still be awesome.
Yeah, maybe, and maybe that's the thing, right? Is that maybe there's just so much stuff that the developers were put in a position not to change anything, right? This isn't what that is about. But I am curious.
I don't think they could change any of the rules.
I'm maybe more curious about what's to come next. And I know that because I love the setting and because I'm so interested in the stuff. I mean, honestly, I co-wrote a Mage book, right? Like I have writing credits on the Syndicate book, which is like the least interesting from the outset part of Mage. They're banker wizards, right? But it was fascinating to be able to be a part of that process and to be involved in the world in that way. And I'm super excited about whatever's going to come next. I just think that maybe if you're looking to get into Mage and you've never played before, Mage 20 might not be the place to do that. Though I don't know that there is another avenue in.
Yeah, like I think this was definitely a very well, like the Mage 20 thing is a very well done, greatest hits, box set, like throwback thing. And that's why in our discussion, I kept bringing this up as like, cool, we have to think about this in context of like, just as we talked about Moldvay in context of its design period, because just because this book came out recently, the design is still very much not recent, yeah.
The Onyx, so whoever it is who works at Onyx Path in chat, we don't think you're a terrible person. we think we are really, examining it as an artifact of its time, and I think that's the fairest way to do it.
Yeah, but I think we are all at the same time, like, because it's on Onyx Path that is like the current publisher. Yeah. Yes. So Onyx Path, if you're listening, if you come up with like new rules, if you come up with like a new, because there was like Mage the Ascension and then there was Mage the Awakening.
Yeah.
Well, think of another word that starts with A and come up with a new version of this game.
Mage the awesome version.
Play the shit out of it.
Mage the awesoming. And please.
Yeah. I mean, or we can go the Paul Riddle route and take that advice to heart that if a game is not doing what you want, but you love some of the things about it, the best thing to do is just make your own version of it. Yeah. Take the golden rule a step further, right? It's not that the golden rule goes too far, it's that it doesn't go too far enough, and make your own game. Cool. So so that's it for Mage 20 for us. And if you are watching this on YouTube, thank you for toughing it out and watching the episodes with us. Hope you had a good time. If you're watching,
it was joy. Come on now.
If you're watching this live, we have a brand new game to play, which I'm going to be a jerk and not announce until we come back from the commercial. But stick around; you can find out what we're going to play. But I will say that it's, I feel, as big a jump away from the goth punk of Mage as Mage was from D&D. We've got another long leap.
We're doing a real good job at our about faces.
Yeah, we're going to take a hard about face and just 90 degrees or 180 degrees in another direction, and we're gonna go check it out. So I'm gonna take a quick break. We're gonna get ready for the next thing, and we will see all of you in just a few minutes. So stick around.